Amy Fisher. Welcome to Amy Fisher at Large. Today my guest is Rich Walling, who is a lifelong resident of East Brunswick and is now a social studies teacher at the Middlesex County Votech School in East Brunswick and the president of the Friends of the Monmouth Battlefield. Welcome, Rich.
Thank you so much, Amy. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today.
Well, I'm very excited about having you here because I expect to learn a lot from you. Our topic is the root of the revolution in New Jersey. So we'll start out with what most people know about when Washington crossed the Delaware and defeated the Hessians in Trenton in Christmas of 1776. I guess that's the most famous New Jersey battle of the Revolution. Is that correct?
Well, that, and we also like to think Monmouth is also as well known, but Trenton is probably the most famous.
It's because of the painting, probably.
Right.
What happened after Trenton?
Well, it's interesting. Just to put it into context, New Jersey, like now, at that time back in the 1700s, was also the bridgeway between New York City and Philadelphia. As Ben Franklin said, we were like a barrel that was tapped at both ends. And the same reason we have the Turnpike and the Parkway and all the other roads today existed 225 years ago. So when Washington crossed the Delaware and fought the Battle of Trenton, surprising the Hessians and capturing them, he quickly retreated back across the Delaware for a couple of days. And then there was something called the Second Battle of Trenton that was fought in early January of 1777. Washington's back was up against the Delaware. British troops were coming down from their garrison at Princeton. And to surprise the British, as Washington loved to do, he snuck around near Quaker Bridge Mall on the Quaker Bridge Road and came up along the Stony Brook, and he attacked the British at Princeton on January 3rd, 1777. Defeated that rearguard action, and then he proceeded up to the Morristown, New Jersey area, which was the first of two encampments at Morristown or Jockey Hollow.
Now, when he was in Princeton, is that when the Nassau Hall was fired upon? And
right, and there's a very amusing, quick little story. Alexander Hamilton was a young artillery officer at that time in Washington's army. He had been denied entrance to Princeton. So he took great delight of aiming his artillery battery at Nassau Hall, and the very first shot fired by Hamilton's gun struck the portrait of King George III, and immediately the British troops that were holed up in Nassau Hall came out and they surrendered to the Americans.
Well, that is a good story. I suppose that people don't have that kind of reaction to not being admitted to college these days.
Hamilton was a little bit of a firebrand.
Well, yes, obviously from his later life, he showed early signs of that. Well, then what happened? After they're in Morristown and Jockey Hollow, which is still pretty famous to visit, and it was winter, right, when they were there?
It was the winter of 1777, and they got up to the Morristown area, and Washington used the hills, the Watchungs and the hills up at Morristown, as a refuge while the British Army was in New York City. And of course, in Somerville, there's Washington Rock, where Washington would come down and keep an eye on the British, because you could see from Somerville all the way across Raritan Bay and into New York City. So he was at Morristown for the rest of 1777, and when spring came, the British Army boarded transport ships, and Washington had no idea where they were going. So he had Jersey militiamen up and down the Jersey coast, keeping an eye on the British Navy, when suddenly, in the fall of 1777, actually the summertime of 1777, the British Navy appeared in Chesapeake Bay. They landed in Maryland, and they came overland to Philadelphia, which they captured that fall.
Wow.
The British entered Philadelphia in the fall of 1777. And of course, meanwhile, in upstate New York, Burgoyne was coming south and met his demise at the battles of Saratoga in upstate New York. And that really changed the complexion of the war. But throughout that year of 1777, there was a lot of movement and activity here in the state.
So then what happened? Where was Washington after when the British took Philadelphia? Where was Washington?
Well, Washington had fought a series of delaying actions trying to prevent the British from capturing the capital. He had fought at Brandywine, he had fought at Germantown outside of Philadelphia. But then when the British captured Philadelphia, Washington, of course, took his army by January 18th into Valley Forge, where they spent a very bitter winter for the next several months.
This was the winter of 1778?
This was the winter of 1778. And as the British were attempting to capture Philadelphia, we can't forget the Battle of Red Bank down in the Gloucester County area near Haddonfield. And there was a lot of activity along the Delaware River from Burlington and Bordentown, New Jersey. All the Jersey ports along the Delaware were bombarded by the British Navy as they were attempting to capture Philadelphia.
So Washington was in Valley Forge for the winter of 1778, and that was sort of the precursor then when he started moving up to go to the Battle of Monmouth?
Right. Essentially what happened was when the British lost at Saratoga and an entire British army was captured by these rough and tumble rabble-in-arms, the Americans, that brought France into the war as a military ally of the United States. The one thing the British had as an advantage over the United States was England had a navy. The Americans did not have a navy. They had some raiders and so forth, but they had nothing to match the British fleet. Well, when France entered the war, that changed the complexion of the conflict. It now became a world war. England had to worry about its possessions in other parts of the world, like the Caribbean and India and Africa. And now the British troops, which had captured Philadelphia, they found themselves in a very tough spot. Philadelphia is on the Delaware River. It could easily be blockaded by the French Navy, so the British had to evacuate Philadelphia. So in June of 1778, the British found themselves with 20,000 men in Philadelphia. It was the main army of the British Empire. It was their main battle army.
Really?
And they had to get to New York City. And in fact, they had orders, if necessary, to go all the way back up to Halifax and abandon New York City if the French showed up. Well, by June 18th, the British had determined that they only had enough shipping available to allow the Loyalists of Philadelphia and the most heavy equipment of the army to go by ship because there was just enough time for one-way trip to the city. That left 20,000 men, 1,500 wagons, and a great number of women and family members of the British troops to trek their way across the state of New Jersey.
Wow, that's amazing. So now they're going across New Jersey, but they are met in the middle somewhere by the American troops or the colonial troops.
That's right. Washington knew that the British would be coming across the state. He had a great spy network available in Philadelphia. Washington was a tremendous spy master. And he knew that the British were coming across New Jersey. He just did not know which way they were going to go. They could have gone one of three routes, and to use modern roads as a reference point, they could have gone up Route 27 through Trenton and Princeton and Kingston, South Brunswick to the Raritan. They could have gone up the Route 130 corridor, at that time was Old George's Road, Route 539, or they could have done what they actually ended up doing, and that was to go out to Sandy Hook through Monmouth County.
Oh, that's interesting.
But Washington didn't know which way they were heading, so he came over at Lambertville, New Jersey. He spent 2 days at Hopewell, with again using the mountains as a refuge and as a place of security if it came to that. And finally, on the morning of June 25th, the British Army at Allentown, New Jersey, made a sharp right turn on Route 524, the old Shrewsbury Road, and they began their long trek across the barrens of Monmouth County out to Sandy Hook. And it was at that time that Washington knew which way the British were going. And in 2 days, from June 25th to June 27th, Washington's army covered 40 miles in a series of forced marches between Hopewell, New Jersey and Englishtown, New Jersey.
Wow, that was a major accomplishment.
It was one of the epic military campaigns of the American Revolution.
Yeah, sounds like it. Now, what happened then after Monmouth? Was that sort of the end of New Jersey's participation in the war? Or?
Well, when the troops got to Monmouth, Monmouth was one of the largest battles of the Revolution. There were 35,000 men in both armies. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention very briefly that all of the New Jersey militia had been called out to repel the British in that summer. The New Jersey militia are the ancestors of the New Jersey National Guard. They're citizen soldiers, and they're called out in emergencies to defend their homes and their communities. that summer, all of the militia was called out to repel the British. So every road, every byway, every trail through the woods had activity as these men were attempting to find the course that the British were taking and then to try to slow them down and try to stop them. Washington wanted to do to General Clinton that summer as had happened to General Burgoyne in upstate New York.
Right.
He wanted to get in front of the British Army, surround them, cut them off, and force them to surrender. And we can't forget that the French fleet was on its way over from Europe, coming to the American waters. So what happened at Yorktown, Virginia, almost happened at Sandy Hook in 1778. But our friends, the French, showed up 6 days too late.
Just as an aside, when the New Jersey militia was that when the term New Jersey Blues started? Was that in the Revolution?
Well, actually, the name New Jersey Blues goes back to the colonial, and even earlier colonial period, as early as the French and Indian War of the 1750s. That was the name given to the uniforms that the Jersey troops wore. They had blue uniforms. So the Jersey Blues is a name that is very ancient in Jersey history.
And still going on, I believe, right?
Right, absolutely.
Yes. Well, you obviously have a great interest in history, both professionally and personally. And I was just wondering, what would you say to people to get them to be interested in learning about the history of this state and going to see places? Because a lot of people really think, well, history is dull and I don't need to know it. But I would think you disagree, and I'd like to hear what you say about that.
Well, we have to remember that we are the inheritors of all of the previous generations. Just as both of my parents fought in World War II, they were both officers in the U.S. military. That World War II generation is quickly going, and I'm sure we remember World War I veterans. So the fact that things have happened in the past does not make them any less relevant. I certainly remember my parents. I remember my grandfather who fought in World War I. So the fact that these things happened 200 years ago, 225 years ago, doesn't make them any less relevant to who we are today as New Jersey citizens and as American citizens. So the other aspect of that is we live in the same landscape that these people had. Yes. From dating back to the Native Americans 10, 15,000 years ago, we still share the same landscape. And over my shoulder is a series of maps and photographs from the period showing historic sites. And part of this whole discovery process, which I'll mention in a moment, has been to find many homes, buildings, farmscapes, and roadways that the troops used 200 years ago that are still with us today. There's one quick story. Down in Middletown Township, a new couple from Brooklyn just bought a home in Middletown Township in Monmouth County, and it turns out that that home was a British headquarters house in the days just after the Battle of Monmouth. Wow. And the wife was happy to hear that, but the husband wasn't.
Oh, really?
They were afraid that there might be some, restrictions to doing work around the house. But the fact is that we've recovered a lost piece of history. Right. Here in East Brunswick, after the Battle of Monmouth, the entire American army under George Washington came through East Brunswick. Wow. Many of our local men were in the militia. Jehu Dunham happens to be one of them. Wow. And of course, Jehu Dunham is the progenitor of Dunham's Corner Road,
That's fantastic.
Dunham's Corner.
Yeah.
So this whole area was just filled with activity and history.
Now, what this year is, or coming up, is the 225th anniversary of the Battle of Monmouth. And I'm sure the Friends of the Battlefield are planning some activities. Could you tell us about some of them?
For the past 2 years, we've been planning for this upcoming summer. And this upcoming summer is the 225th anniversary. What we have worked with groups from throughout the state is something called Road to Monmouth. And it's Road to Monmouth Heritage Campaign. And beginning on June 21st and ending on July 13th, for 2 weeks, there will be a series of events beginning on the Delaware River at Camden and Gloucester City for the British route, at Lambertville for the American route, coming across the state in 2 lines of march, replicating the British line of march up through Burlington County and into Monmouth County, and also replicating the American line of march through Somerset County, Hunterton County, Middlesex County, and into Monmouth County. Every day before the reenactment on June 28th, there will be events across the central part of the state. The big battle will be on June 28th and 29th at Monmouth Battlefield State Park in Manalapan. And we're going to have between 2,000 and 3,000 people in uniform actually recreating the Battle of Monmouth. Horses, cannons.
Wow.
No battle deaths, though, we hope.
No, we hope not, no.
And then the following weekend, on the 4th of July, there will be a big celebration in Johnson's Park and Buchloh Park along the Raritan River. And on the 5th of July, we are saying goodbye to the British at Sandy Hook, the day they actually embarked. And then the following week, there's an event in Hohokus, New Jersey, where General Charles Lee was court-martialed for being insubordinate at the Battle of Monmouth.
Oh, really?
Yes, he was the second highest ranking officer, second only to George Washington. He wanted Washington's job, and he wrote a series of very nasty letters to Washington after the battle, for which he was court-martialed and suspended from the Army. And all of his court-martial took place as the American Army went from Monmouth up to White Plains, New York.
Wow.
So all of these things are just tied into the sites and the communities here today.
Well, I think what's so fascinating is when you talk about things like that, there were obviously a lot of politics and all kinds of, the same kinds of personal problems and everything that go on today. Of course, I don't know. Fortunately, we're not having battles with cannons anymore in New Jersey, but still the same kind of people. And so when you think of George Washington, you sort of think of this austere person on a horse, but he really was a person, right?
Absolutely. He had a temper, a sense of humor, and for one half of the war, he spent his time here in the state of New Jersey. And all of that history is being incorporated in national legislation at the federal government level to establish something called the Crossroads of the American Revolution National Heritage Area, which includes East Brunswick
Really?
and most of Middlesex County. So that's something that the federal government is recognizing. Of course, we have Morristown and Jockey Hollow.
Right.
We have a number of other historic sites. But what people really should realize is that East Brunswick, during the war, there were 3 major military actions in East Brunswick. In February of 1777, there was a skirmish at Bennett's Island, which is now Edgeboro Landfill.
Oh, really?
So there's not too much left there.
No, I guess it's not a place you want to visit.
Yeah, I think only the seagulls have remained.
Right.
The American Army came through East Brunswick after the Battle of Monmouth. We had 13,000 men trudging their way through East Brunswick on their way to New Brunswick. And in the fall of 1779, there was a major raid that came through East Brunswick that ended up at what was then called the South River Bridge, which we better know today as Old Bridge, the Old Bridge Historic District.
Oh, interesting.
There was a major military action there a year after Monmouth. So there was a lot of activity here.
What are some of the places that people could go to see? I know Jockey Hollow you mentioned, and you can visit Monmouth Battlefield, I presume?
Monmouth Battlefield, the old barracks. A wonderful book came out about 2 years ago called New Jersey's Revolutionary War Trail by Mark Diano, who's an editor with the Star Ledger, and it's a publication of Rutgers University Press. We have a website, which I'll mention, called Road to Monmouth, all one phrase, roadtomonmouth.com, and that has all of the events that are happening across the state coming up. Trenton, the old barracks and Princeton Battlefield, and there's a number of sites, and of course Washington Crossing State Park.
Yes.
But even a lot of the parks and sites that are not as well known are still there and still have a story to tell.
Yeah, Washington Crossing State Park is where they have the reenactment of the crossing of the Delaware every Christmas.
Every December 25th,
Right.
they have the reenactment, and a few days later, every year, they have a reenactment of the Battle of Trenton at the Old Barracks, which is a wonderful place to bring a family for a day.
So when did the Revolution actually end? When was the surrender in Yorktown?
Well, the surrender of Yorktown came in October of 1781. However, once the Battle of Monmouth was over in 1778, the war, for the most part, had shifted to the southern states, Georgia, the Carolinas, culminating at Yorktown in Virginia. But there was still a lot of activity going on here in New Jersey because the British Army's headquarters was in New York City.
Right.
The British did not evacuate New York City until November of 1783. So from
Really?
1778 to 1783 is 5 years. And there was raiding going on. There were a lot of vengeful activities, particularly in Monmouth County, between the Loyalists and the Patriots, or the Tories and the rebels, depending on your perspective. People were being shot and executed and tarred and feathered all throughout the rest of the war. Just a few months after the British surrendered at Yorktown, in Monmouth County, there was a man from Colts Neck named Joshua Huddy. He was captured at Toms River, imprisoned in New York City for a few days, and then ruthlessly executed under orders of Ben Franklin's son, William Franklin, who was the last royal governor. And he was brutally murdered 6 months after Yorktown, just in an act of vengeance for all of the atrocities that we were committing against the local Loyalists.
Actually, Ben Franklin disowned his son, or was
Right.
estranged from his son because they were on opposite sides in
They
the
only
war.
spoke once after the American Revolution. They had been best friends before the war,
Yeah.
almost like brothers. But the war kept them on, or put them at different ends of the political spectrum.
And so that's sort of understandable. Now, was the royal governor's house in Perth Amboy, I believe,
That's
right?
the proprietary house. It's the only standing royal governor's house in the entire 13 original states. The governor's palace in Williamsburg is a reconstruction, but the proprietary house in Perth Amboy is the only original governor's mansion that still stands.
The Friends of the Monmouth Battlefield. Can anyone join? And
Absolutely. Our email address is monmouthb@aol.com. I'm in the telephone book. We have a new office at the battlefield. We have monthly meetings, and we do a lot of activities from research and education to staging reenactments and saving old buildings, and really trying to let folks know that the American Revolution was a people's revolution. Everyone was involved, women, folks from different ethnic and racial backgrounds. Were all in unison in trying to create a new entity called the United States of America.
Rich, I know there were many different flags in the Revolution, and your tie is has one of the symbols. What does your tie say?
Well, the tie has an image of a rattlesnake and the phrase, "Don't tread on me." And essentially what that represents is during the colonial period leading up to the American Revolution, folks like Ben Franklin had attempted to unite all of the 13 colonies into one identity, an American identity. So the image of a rattlesnake, like that of the turkey and the bald eagle, is clearly representative of America, as opposed to Europe or anywhere else in the world. So the rattlesnake was selected as a symbol to bring together all of the disparate parts of the 13 original colonies into one actual body. And again, the rattlesnake, being an American symbol, was chosen to represent that. And the phrase, "Don't tread on me," simply means don't abuse my rights, don't treat me like I'm not a citizen of England or an Englishman. And that phrase carried through the war. And of course, nowadays there would be another modern equivalent, which I won't mention.
Right.
But "don't tread on me" really means, don't disabuse me in any way, shape, or form.
Now, did each of the militias have their own flag?
Not the militias per se, but each state had a state
state.
emblem. Of course, New Jersey state emblem has 2 women on it, the goddess Ceres, or Demeter, that represents fertility, and also the goddess of liberty. And of course, the goddess of liberty is an American goddess. So it was using that imagery to hearken back to the days of ancient Greece and ancient Rome, because the Americans were attempting to establish a republic, which was something that had not been seen really since the days of Rome. And there was a great connection between the American cause and the establishment of the Roman Republic.
Well, when did actually the flag that supposedly Bessie Ross made, when did that actually become adopted throughout the colonies?
That was adopted sometime in 1777. The first time it was ever seen by the British was during the campaign of 1777 in upstate New York. But a very interesting point, unlike the movie The Patriot, which many people have seen with Mel Gibson, the national flag was not used really for military purposes. There'd be division flags and headquarters flags and other kinds of flags that would help you see what unit was at a particular place through the smoke-filled battlefield. So the national flag was not really used for military purposes until a little bit later in American history. But there was a wide range of all kinds of unit flags and state flags.
Yes. You have an event coming up in March. Could you tell us about that?
Well, the inaugural event to kick off all the things happening in June in Road to Monmouth is going to be a seminar on March 22nd at the Ramada Inn in Hightstown, New Jersey, at Exit 8 on the Turnpike. And it's called Road to Monmouth Conference. And we are having a seminar in the morning, followed by a lunch. But then the key part of the day will be a series of up to 5 separate bus tours that attendees can take. One bus route will follow the British route from the Haddonfield area up to through Allentown, New Jersey, and over towards Englishtown. The second bus route will be the American column of Line of March from Lambertville through Hopewell and Rocky Hill and Kingston and Cranberry to Englishtown. The third bus will be the actual Battle of Monmouth itself, one of the biggest battles of the war.
Right.
The fourth bus tour will be the route the British took from Freehold out through Middletown, New Jersey to Sandy Hook, and they will pass Bruce Springsteen's property in Colts Neck Township. And the fifth bus route will be from Englishtown to New Brunswick and Piscataway up to Bergen County, that follows the American line of march following the Battle of Monmouth.
Now they'll all leave from the Ramada Inn.
And they'll all leave from the Ramada Inn. And so that people have an opportunity to take up to 3 tours. The tours begin on Friday the 21st of March, Saturday is the conference, and Sunday the 23rd of March we'll also have buses available. So people can get 3 out of 5 tours.
And how can they sign up to do this? Or?
We have again, our website, roadtomonmouth.com. And also we have our telephone number at our park headquarters, which is 732-308-0330. And folks can call and leave a message. They can write to the Friends of Monmouth Battlefield, or they can email us.
That sounds like a great trip for families to go on.
And this is the first time in New Jersey history, the history of history in New Jersey, that the actual Monmouth campaign is really being given any attention to. What General Sherman did to Georgia in 1864, the British, the Germans, and the Loyalists did to New Jersey in 1778. They plundered, pillaged, and they just marched across to the sea generations before Sherman did.
Right. One last question about the Battle of Monmouth. Molly Pitcher. Now, was Molly Pitcher really there?
Molly Pitcher was really there, yes. We don't know her last name, but she lived her life at Carlisle, Pennsylvania. She passed away in the 1830s while she was in her 80s, and she was a real person, but she was just one of several women who fought at Monmouth, but she's the best known.
Yes. Well, thanks again, and we'll hope everybody will come to Monmouth and take part in the 225th anniversary, and we're happy you were here today.
Thank you.